Hello, friends and supporters of Houston's Asian Voice. I'm Peter Lee. Today we'll continue our dialogue with Dr. Rubenstein about China, China's foreign relations, and China's relations with the United States. But today, our subject is about the South China Sea, especially the controversy surrounding China's activities in this region. There are a lot of misperceptions about China in South China Sea. The following are some of the misperceptions. First, Communist China has recently declared 90% of South China Sea as China's territorial waters. So China is aggressive and expansionist. Second, China has no right to build artificial islands inside the non-Dutch line because by illegally building these islands, China is militarizing the South China Sea. Third, Communist China's declaration of much of South China Sea as its territorial waters is a violation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. This violation is more unacceptable because China is a member of the convention. So today we'll talk about these misperceptions, and specifically, we're going to tackle the following questions. Question number one, what is a non-Dutch line that includes 80% of the South China Sea inside China's boundaries? Second, who drew the non-Dutch line? Is it a new boundary drawn by Communist China, as Western media and commentators have us believe? Number three, if the non-Dutch line was so illegitimate, why hadn't the United States stood up and spoken for the Philippines and Vietnam when the line was drawn? I agree that the United States under President Truman, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, and Nixon had many opportunities to explicitly deny China American rights under the non-Dutch line, but the United States chose not to do it. Number four, does the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea have a jurisdiction over territorial disputes in South China Sea? And for that matter, anywhere in the world, can the convention be used against the maritime boundary drawn by China 4 decades earlier? Number five, is the accusation that China is seeking territorial expansion convincing simply because China is building military facilities inside the non-Dutch line in South China Sea? As we know, to the Chinese, doing anything inside the non-Dutch line is like doing anything in Sichuan, in Hong Kong, or even in Taiwan. These are all China's territories. China has a sovereign right to do anything on its territory, impacting no other country's sovereignty and rights. So we'll talk about these issues, and we'll hear Dr. Rubenstein's take on these controversial questions.
Hi, Dan. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Peter.
So what's the issue of South China Sea? One of the biggest confusion regarding the South China Sea conflict is the non-Dutch line, formerly 11 Dutch line. You can see on the screen U-shaped line going from close to China's Hainan Islands, along the eastern coast of Vietnam, and to the south, very close to Malaysia and Indonesia, and going up along the west coastline of the Philippines. The non-Dutch line used to be 11 Dutch line, seems to include 90% of South China Sea inside China. So what is the problem with this non-Dutch line? Is it legitimate? Dan?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I think it's not. UNCLOS in the Philippines case ruled that it is not. And part of the reason for that is that as a signatory to UNCLOS, China agreed to renounce purely historical claims unless they can meet certain standards, and the 9-dash line really doesn't. It's changed a lot over time. It's gone 11, 9. China has removed and added some lines. They don't have firm coordinates where the lines are, so it's not even clear exactly where they should be on a map. They change a bit from map to map, and perhaps a few other reasons, but those are some of the main reasons. But I think the key thing under international law and under the law of the sea, UNCLOS, is that determining your territorial and your exclusive economic zone waters really is a function of distance from territory. And the 9-dash line really just doesn't adhere to that.
Okay. I think, perhaps it is important to ask our audience who drew the 9-dash line and when was the line drawn? And I wonder how many of you who are, watching this video can answer this question. If I tell you that the 9-dash line was actually drawn and marked on the map of China by an ally of the United States, would you be surprised? Also, if I tell you that the United States and President Truman did not object to the 9-dash line, and of course, the inclusion of much of South China Sea inside China, would you be surprised? So the answer is the 9-dash line was formally drawn in 1947 and marked on the map of China in 1948 by the American ally, which was the Republic of China. So in fact, President Truman supported China's reclaiming the Plateau Islands or South China Sea Islands in 1946 using 3 retired American warships under the Chinese Navy's command. So in a word, I would say the 9-dash line was not drawn by Communist China. Therefore, the South China Sea dispute was not anything new, was not a dispute created by Communist China, no matter how much many people in the West, in the United States, did not like the regime in Beijing. So we need to ask the question, why didn't President Truman stand up for the rights of the Philippines and the Vietnamese people? In 1935, when China first contemplated drawing the 11-dash line at that time, and in 1947, when China drew the dash line, and in 1948, 11-dash line appeared on the map of China. So if it were all right for China to declare its boundaries, including South China Sea at that time, why is it a problem today?
Well, a couple of reasons, I would argue. One is that there were opportunities in the 40s and the 50s, various treaties, which you being a scholar know better than I do, for the United States to formally acknowledge Chinese control over certain features within the 9-dash line, specifically the Spratly Islands, and the United States declined to do so. So that's one reason. But I think the more important reason is that once China agreed to the UN Law of the Sea Convention, UNCLOS, the situation really completely changed, because there are certain rules that UNCLOS stipulates as to how you determine your territorial and your exclusive economic zone waters. And the fact of the matter is that the 9-dash line simply violates those rules. Now, we can have a discussion about what China really means by the 9-dash line, because that's not entirely clear.
Okay, but I have to remind you, Dan, UNCLOS was negotiated in 1982, 1984, if I were correct, and formally entered into effect in the early 1990s. Can the International Convention undo the territorial boundary of a country which was drawn 4 decades ago?
Well, to be a little bit technical and pedantic, UNCLOS doesn't determine territories, but what it does do is it provides rules, kind of like a law or a legal framework, and those rules are then applied. And so I think, yes, if the historical territories within the waters, territorial waters, if you will, broadly speaking, if they violate those rules, then yes, my answer would be that an international treaty can change the extent of those territorial waters. Yes.
I don't think the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is applicable to existing maritime boundaries. If you insist that the convention has jurisdictions on the territorial disputes in South China Sea, then that would create a situation that a lot of countries' maritime boundaries will have to be redrawn to overthrow existing boundaries. China drew the 11 dash line in 1947, 4 decades earlier, so 4 decades before the creation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Okay, now let's go to the next topic. Now, China has been massively building artificial islands in South China Sea. This action has caused a lot of criticism, especially from the United States. Some people claimed that China is being expansionist. China is militarizing South China Sea, and United States in particular has conducted the so-called freedom of navigation operation. So what do you think?
I think that on the part of the United States and the West, there is sort of a fear, the classic fear of deterrence, that you don't ever really know what the other party thinks or what their goals are. And so you plan for worst case scenarios. And so I think there's a lot of that going on, that if China positions itself more strongly within the South China Sea, that it could give them leverage and simply an easier time to expand and attack other countries if they so desired. Having said that, I think looking historically at China, I personally don't believe it's expansionist in a traditional sense. And I'm not even sure many people in Washington would say that. But I think it is expansionist in the sense that it clearly has territorial claims on Taiwan. Taiwan is its territory. And it wants to deepen and expand the rights that it has, within the South China Sea. And so in that sense, and especially as the rights it claims go beyond UNCLOS, I think that I would say it is kind of expansionist in that way.
Right. So that's the first question. China's expansionist tendency. The question is China expanding outside its traditional territory? Now, in the eyes of the Chinese authorities, South China Sea is within the traditional boundary of China.
When you say that mainland China's national reunification ambition with Taiwan can be an indicator of a territorial expansion, and I'm sure Beijing is going to push back on that one. In the eyes of China, national reunification is not territorial expansion. Taiwan is a part of China.
If China is building something inside Shanghai or inside Canton or inside Hong Kong, that's within China's territory, that's not expansionist. If China is doing it inside South China Sea, according to China's position, it is within its boundary. It's not expansionist. If China is building artificial islands in the Gulf of Mexico, then that's expansionist. Another question is, now this from a more realistic perspective, when China is doing something in South China Sea or anywhere in East Asia, it is considered China's backyard. So if the United States can demand any other powers not to, set up a military or whatever presence in the Western Hemisphere, why would it be a problem for China to build up its own military capabilities in the region?
Well, I think you've raised some really excellent points. I think that there's certainly a hypocrisy on the part of the United States. The United States has the largest global network of military bases in the world by far. So China is certainly not doing anything that the United States hasn't already done. And I think the fact that it's in the South China Sea and in some cases on islands that are pretty undisputably Chinese territory, like in the Paracels, the United States doesn't have any sort of legal leg to stand on to say you shouldn't be doing that. I think the problem is whenever the status quo changes, right? So the question then becomes, why is China building up its navy to the extent that it is? Why is it building bases throughout the South China Sea that it never had before? Are they purely defensive or not? And I think, again, there's always that unknown in international relations and in international conflict situations where you just don't know. And so this kind of worries and alarms decision makers in Washington and other, and Asian countries. And so it's really that change in the status quo that I think is just driving a lot of the questioning.
Okay, so cause a suspicion despite the concerns of other countries. Right? China believes it has the right to do whatever within its territory. They decide to build up the navy, right? Or they can decide not to build up. That's all their business.
No question.
So one of the arguments was that China had not maintained effective control over South China Sea, islands and shores, rocks for so long. Now you suddenly want to establish, control. I believe the Chinese answer was that, I could have 10 houses. I only have one body. I live in one house, but that does not mean that the 9 houses empty is not mine, are not mine, right? So that's my property, under my name, right?
I think those will be very tricky cases if it ever does come back to the tribunal under UNCLOS or any international law tribunal. I think that's going to be a very tricky case. Mm-hmm. Situations where China did not exercise effective control and sovereignty over an island when they signed UNCLOS, but in the interim they now do. I think a less tricky case will be where a water feature did not constitute an island. It was not above water at high tide, but yet China is adding sand and adding material to build it up into what they will now claim as an island. That is very clearly a violation of international law. Okay. So, yeah, but some of these cases could be pretty difficult, actually, to ferret out in the future.
Yeah, but the rules regarding shore, rocks not considered territories are written in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But before that, there were no such rules regarding what constitutes, territory on the sea. So that's why China did not believe that the 1994 Convention of the Law of the Sea should retroactively undo territorial or maritime boundaries. So the convention cannot undo past territorial boundaries.
I'd like to make a comment about U.S. foreign policy here. Mm-hmm. So I think, as I said earlier, it would add great credibility to the United States if they signed on to UNCLOS, because right now there's a paradoxical situation where the United States adheres to UNCLOS pretty religiously, but is not a signatory.
When question other countries' maritime rights.
Well, and even within its own, you and I have earlier had the conversation about a Chinese warship that found its way into U.S. territorial waters in around Hawaii, and the United States respected that, and they didn't demand pre-identification as China does. They didn't attack it in any way. They monitored it, but they made a statement afterwards saying that what China did was not a violation of international law, to the extent that it was exercising innocent passage. There's some question whether China was only exercising innocent passage or doing some surveillance or reconnaissance, but that's another question. So I think the United States has respected those rules for themselves as well, I would argue, unless we have other examples. But my point is that it would benefit the United States a lot if it would sign on. It hasn't. It is, however, asking China to abide by it. So when we talk about things like, well, China didn't intend to give up these historical claims, really the question is then why did China sign UNCLOS at all? So I think China can't have it both ways, right? They can't say we respect international law and we respect the UN and we want to resolve disputes according to international norms, and at the same time say, but we're not subject to these particular clauses or rules of UNCLOS because we don't want to be.
Yeah.
That's not a very tenable or convincing position. None of it has much to do with what's going to happen on the ground. I mean, what's going to happen is going to happen. But in terms of arguments and justifying yourself, I don't think China is going to be successful. It's just too incoherent.
Okay, but I would say that China would not have signed the convention if the convention would result in a redemarcation of China's maritime boundaries, right? So that's the condition, the word there. So that's the first one I want to say. And you said that you're not sure whether China's passage was innocent in the Hawaii area, and I can tell you, China's passage was innocent. There is one way to determine whether China's passage was innocent or not. If China has kept on sending warships to the waters near Hawaii, that would not be interpreted by the United States as innocent. Right? Now, China just once in a blue moon send a warship for other purposes. The first time in 20 years. Now, if you look at the United States, sending warships to South China Sea, like close to those islands, 5 times between 2015 and 2017, and many times in the past few years, and go through the Taiwan Strait, which we are going to talk about very soon. Right? So it would be very hard for China to say the American passage is innocent. Right? They interpret it as a show of force, as a form of pressure on China. I'm sure you would agree with me that when United States send warships to South China Sea, going through the Taiwan Strait is a show of force. Do you agree? It's not an innocent passage. You would think that's an innocent passage?
Well, first of all, when they go through the Taiwan Straits, they're not going through territorial waters. They're going through an exclusive economic zone. So whether it's a show of force is debatable. What the United States would say is that they are simply exercising freedom of navigation under international law.
Okay, whether the Taiwan Strait is international waters or not is the subject of our next dialogue. But I would agree that China should raise issues if American merchant ships navigate through the Taiwan Strait. However, we understand that there is a lot of abuse of the freedom of navigation. If a navigation is primarily or exclusively done by naval ships, the navigation can hardly be called innocent. I don't know if you agree with me. Dan?
And I think we should note that interpretation of UNCLOS is very beneficial and biased towards the United States, right? Because who has the blue water navy that circles the globe?
Yeah.
I would.
You would agree, but would you agree that American warships in South China Sea and going through the Taiwan Strait is not innocent? Would you agree to that?
Well, legally it is. In terms of the reality, there's no question that the United States is trying to send a message to the PRC that it best not try to take over Taiwan by force. Yeah.
So in that case, it is completely reasonable for Beijing to react strongly against the passage of American warships, right?
Well, I think you raised a counterfactual, which I think is interesting. If China started to send its warships over to Hawaii or along the California coast regularly, what would the United States do? We don't know, but I don't disagree with you that the United States would not be very happy, and they may start to take a somewhat different tone.
I would say I know what the United States would do. United States would protest, of course. United States would probably use warships to intercept or to stop or to block, right, the passage of Chinese warship, possibly, right? Because the United States would not consider that's innocent.
Well, if China, that would be a very interesting experiment on Xi Jinping's part if he wanted to push that.
Yeah. I doubt he would do that because, as I said, everything China has been doing in the past, 30 years has been done inside China's traditional boundary. Right? So even Xi Jinping is not going to send the warships, right, to the Atlantic Ocean, to the Indian Ocean, very close to India, close to Argentina, or the UK or the United States. I don't think that, the Beijing leaders are going to do that, or Xi Jinping is going to do that.
I guess time will tell.
Yes, maybe in the future, yeah. But when Xi Jinping is still the leader, I doubt he's going to do that. He has some other more important things on his table. Okay, now let's go to our next question, which is also very interesting.